Hello, webinar attendees. My name is Marisol Morales, and I serve as the Vice President for Network Leadership with Campus Compact. We're so happy to have you as part of our 9th Campus Compact National Webinar this year. This one is titled, Braving the Wilderness, How Vulnerability Can Be a Pathway for Social Change. And we have with us our wonderful and talented presenters who I'll be introducing shortly. First, I want to plug a few Campus Compact activities and events. First, I'd ask you to check out our Compact Nation bi-weekly podcast. We actually have one dropping today. It's co-hosted by the president of Campus Compact, Andrew Sellickson, our director from Iowa, Minnesota Campus Compact, Emily Shields, and myself. And the one that's dropping today is with folks from our Engaged Scholars Initiative, which is a equity-centered professional development program geared towards early career community engagement professionals and pre-tenured faculty. So please check that out. In addition, there's still time to register for our Campus Compact National Conference that's taking place in Seattle, Washington, March 29th through April 1st. The price goes up tomorrow, so you want to be sure to take advantage of that today. The title of our conference is the Full Participation, the Promise of Democracy, Opportunity, and Voice. In addition, we just released the names and the institutions and individuals for our Impact Award. So check out our website, compact.org, to see our recipients. Now on to the introduction of our webinar panelists. First, we have Judy Patello, who's the director at the Center for Community Engagement at California State University, Office of the Chancellor. For more than 20 years, Judy has been leading and implementing innovative service learning and community engagement initiatives that support the unique needs and interests of higher education institutions and their surrounding community. As the director of the CSU Center for Community Engagement, Judy delivers, inspires, and sustains high-quality learning opportunities by promoting programs and initiatives that create inclusive spaces for authentic relationships to occur and that honor personal growth, self-empowerment, and lifelong learning. Since 2010, her office has successfully supported the expansion of service learning by 93% in STEM disciplines. Judy's family emigrated to Massachusetts from the Azorian Islands in the 1970s, and she's a staunch New England Patriots fan and believes that combining mindfulness and meditation with equity work fosters understanding and healing. Next, I'll introduce Cristina Gonzalez Salgado, who serves as the SEM Vista Program Coordinator with the Center for Community Engagement at the Chancellor's Office for the California State University System. The SEM Vista program's mission is to eliminate the disparities of race, class, and gender in STEM undergraduate degrees. She previously worked for 18 years as a service learning coordinator at Cal Poly Pomona's Center for Community Engagement with a focus on increasing service learning opportunities and faculty development. Christina received her Bachelor's of Arts in Psychology and Social Behavior from UC Irvine and her master's degree in higher education from Claremont Graduate University. As the proud daughter of Cuban refugees and a mother of 7 children, she is deeply committed to working in collaboration with others to address inequity. Finally, Nancy Luna Jimenez is recognized regionally, nationally, and internationally for her highly effective and insightful training, inclusive facilitation, and dynamic speaking with groups of diverse ages, industries, and cultural backgrounds. She founded Luna Jimenez Institute for Social Transformation in 1994 to design and deliver programs to encourage individuals in their process of personal transformation, releasing individual initiative to create a more just and equitable workplace and world. Nancy facilitates individuals and groups to look freshly at where they might be stuck while supporting them to make transformational changes they envision through personal healing, cross-cultural communication, group consensus, organization inclusion, and short and long-term planning and implementation. Of Puerto Rican and Chicana heritage, Nancy was born in Detroit, Michigan, and raised in Detroit and Tucson, Arizona. Nancy thrives on doing bomba, an Afro-Puerto Rican dance and drum tradition, traveling, hiking, weightlifting, training for half marathons, and practicing yoga on and off the mat. So welcome to our wonderful panelists, and I'll turn it over to you.
Well, to add to our introductions, we wanted to see us as children, and we wanted to share how we were raised and our childhood experience have really shaped our experiences as adults. And so for me, I grew up My parents were Cuban refugees and were constantly volunteering, helping neighbors, sending supplies to Cuba. I was constantly in an environment where family was always the collective, very important to be part of the family, very important. And it wasn't a give back or pay it forward situation. It was just, you just do it, and that's who you are, and that's who we are. And so higher education, I gravitated towards higher education because I feel that there's so many collective components about higher ed. People who come together for a common purpose, whether it's students, whether it's intellectually sharing, we come together in our humanity, and it was exactly where my spirit felt at home, because it reminded me of my family at home, being part of a collective, and that's why I do this work.
Thanks, Christina. And for me, this picture is actually a cropped picture of my entire family. I'm one of 9. And as Marisol indicated, my family immigrated from the Azorian Islands. And the reason I picked this picture is one of the early messages I got as a child was that everything you do is to benefit the family and others, and your needs come last, if not at all. And I always recognized how that message impacted me personally, and the work that I've been doing with Nancy, I've really been cognizant of how that message has impacted my leadership style, and how that's impacted my team and the work that I do, and that it's really rooted in classism and sexism in many ways. And so what we're hoping to share with you today is how those early childhood messages really impact our patterns, how oppression really impacts the way that we have internalized oppression in so many different ways in what we do personally and in our work. And I think that's important to recognize. Nancy?
Thanks, Judy. Yeah, so I'm Nancy, and I wanted to just highlight again why we think it's so important that we are using our baby pictures or pictures of us as young people. As Marisol mentioned in my introduction, that I was born and raised in Detroit. I was actually born in the middle of the uprising, the racial uprising in the summer of '67, and so much of what impacted my life was the racism in that part of the world, and also the internalized racism in my family of being both Puerto Rican and Mexican, and also ableism. Both my parents are disabled, and I was also born disabled. Classism, sexism, obviously, and other oppressions. And we wanted you to see us in our young self, in our vision. Little ones, we believe they're completely in charge of the world. And if you've ever spent time with a 2-year-old, I don't even need to tell you that. You can't tell a little person they're not in charge. It doesn't make sense. And I think that every single person on this webinar right now, every single person on the planet came into the world with that image of themselves as powerful and in charge and able to make the world right. And that these pictures to me really symbolize the best of what is profound and human about all of us as young people. And I don't think it's a coincidence that every major social movement in the world, pretty much probably in the last 2 centuries, if not before, has been led by young people, because we have this really clear passion and vision. And so I have to, wonder sort of what happens to us as adults. Well, in our theory of change, it's that adultism is the training ground for all other oppressions. And it's in the ways in which we get targeted and mistreated as young people, being made to feel not smart enough or good enough or strong enough, but mostly not fully human yet, because we are simply little. That those messages eventually, after much fighting back, and I believe that what are called the terrible twos is really young people pushing back against those messages, we eventually do internalize some of those messages. And the adultism can look like many things. It can look like being squished and being made to feel humiliated, or being attacked in some way physically, or corporal punishment. It can also be being made to feel that you should act like an adult, or being put in charge of younger siblings when you yourself have been a child or are a child yourself, or being expected to be, quote, perfect, or this amazing track star, or whatever the expectations might have been that really didn't allow for the full range of what it meant to be human and vulnerable and to have struggle. And so this isn't in any way to blame or be hard on parents or teachers and or any adults around us that were encouraging us. It's this inability to understand how adultism plays out and continues to play out in our equity work today that we wanted to start with, to highlight, to bring to our collective attention as we unfold a journey around racial justice and equity work that we've been doing in partnership over the last few years together.
Thanks, Nancy. So we know we have really limited time with you today, and given our technology and that we're unable to interact with you in the way that we really enjoy and thrive, we want to say that what we're going to do today is really geared towards a taste. So we're giving you a taste of the frameworks and the theory, and we hope that you will learn something, learn a new skill to increase your skillfulness in communicating with people that you would disagree with. And we really want to take this time for you to explore what it means to be value-based and to be vulnerable, especially when it comes to higher ed. In higher ed, vulnerability, emotions are not something that's really valued. And sometimes it's a really hard thing for us personally to think about how do we allow ourselves to be vulnerable. And so we're going to ask you as we share these frameworks and this theory to think about and reflect on what vulnerability looks like for you, and to reflect on times that you've braved the wilderness and you've gone it alone and you've felt alone and isolated, and to think about ways that you can possibly brave the wilderness in new ways that you might not have. And then we want you to feel energized and equipped to have challenging conversations across difference and dominance. What you will learn today is very different from some typical racial justice, social justice, and diversity trainings you might have gone through. And so we want you to be open to that and hopefully feel inspired and energized that this work in higher ed within the community engagement field is possible. So we decided to open with this polling question. We're opening the poll, and we would like you to indicate whether you feel like you have institutional support to do racial justice and equity work. And one of the reasons that we really wanted to ask this question is because it's really grounded, as you will hear in our stories throughout the webinar, in the sense that sometimes we don't really feel supported. So I don't know if Nancy wants to chime in and add a little bit something here while we wait for the poll results.
Oh, I think we've got our results in.
Oh, great. Okay. So it looks like 55% of you have indicated that you feel supported. That's wonderful. 10% say no, and 25% indicate somewhat feel supported in doing this work. That is really, really good news. And I would say that for me, I haven't always felt supported to do this work. In particular, I started my career in higher ed at a pretty young age, and that has times been really challenging. And I would say that as the director of a system-wide program, there have been times throughout when our network of community engaged leaders were really struggling. We would come together, and these are all dedicated and caring individuals, but we were struggling as a group. And some folks really didn't feel heard. And my attempts over the years to try to have these dialogues for people to feel listened to and to be listened to did not go really well. And when the Chancellor's Office, really the CSU initiated their graduation initiative and worked to really close the achievement gap, I was waiting for the system office to make racial justice and equity work a core of the chancellor's office work. And maybe it was age and lots of experience at this point where I made the decision. You're going to hear us talk about this a lot today. I was who I was waiting for. And I had been familiar with the work that Nancy had been doing through a longtime colleague of mine who's also a trainer of LGIST. And so I reached out to Nancy to talk about what I was hoping that we could do together. And so this next slide really talks about kind of what we did over the course of the last 2 years. And it's important to note that we offered a Transformational Communication Institute with CSU community engagement leaders, but this was a voluntary participation by those leaders, and it included any staff member from the ARC community engagement offices on campuses. And we came together for 3 days. And one of the frameworks and the theories that you're going to hear about today was introduced at this institute. And following that 3-day institute, we then did what is called a Just Listening program for several months. That was part of the LGIST program. And basically, you'll hear a little bit more from Nancy around constructivist listening and dyads. This just listening is when groups of people come together, continue the work of constructivist listening together. You will see here this cost about $1,650 per person. This might seem pricey to you at first, but actually if you think about the fact that this spanned multiple months and has continued, so, and included a 3-day training and these listening sessions and, you know, several months of just listening as a group, it's actually quite cost effective when you think about what we tend to spend for conferences and travels. And the difference of this model and the willingness to commit to it post also offers additional benefits that you really can't put a price tag on. And so in 2017, at the Transformational Communication Institute, we had about 23 participants. And since that time, 18 people have continued in their dyad partnerships that were identified back in 2017. They typically meet weekly. Additionally, some participants are meeting quarterly for those just listening group sessions. Those are slightly different from having a one-on-one partner. It kind of challenges you in a different way. And again, that ability to and willingness to be vulnerable, because you can get very comfortable sometimes with your one dyad partner. And when you open it up, you're really challenging yourself to be more vulnerable with a group of people. And again, reconnecting ourselves as human beings. We were unable the following year to offer more, but I knew I wanted to do more. And so that 18 group of people continued to commit while we were trying to figure out how we could offer what you see here in 2019, the Transformational Leadership Institute. We were the inaugural group, and it was really exciting to do this work with Nancy and Kathleen on this effort. The reason we were able to offer this is we opened it nationally, and I cannot do enough justice to think about what it meant to open up this institute with others from outside of the CSU. These are all individuals who had gone through transformational communication. That was a prerequisite, but we have formed new relationships and again, shared language and framework with folks from outside of the system that have been really valuable. As part of that program, we also did a 10-week just listening session as well. And all of us are continuing to commit through our dyad partnerships in this work. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Nancy to talk a little bit more about one of the theories, the discharge theory, that is the grounding force of the work that we do with LGIST.
Thanks. Before you turn it over, Judy, I didn't know if you wanted to share a little bit about what we found when we gathered for the transformational leadership, that we lost a good chunk of our original participants, and what the impact was for you about that.
So we had close to almost 40 originally participants, and close to when Transformational Leadership Institute was going to be offered, 6 people had to cancel at the last minute. And what was really surprising was that most of those folks were people of color. And we really started the Institute with Nancy talking about why that was so incredibly important, and how oppression, while everyone that was unable to make it had real reasons of why that occurred. But Nancy really started the Institute making us aware that oppression was at work here, and that people of color, in particular, this work is more difficult for them, and oppression impacts their lives in many different ways. And for those of us who were white in the room, it was really important for us to hear that and to feel the heaviness of that understanding as we came together to do this work. And to really recognize how oppression impacts all of us in so many unseen ways every day. And so for me, that's what grounds me every day in being committed to doing this work personally, and to support this work across the system in a way that I truly believe in my heart. And again, I wasn't, not waiting for anyone to tell me this is the way forward, and not listening to those messages that this can't happen in higher ed. Thanks, Nancy, for the reminder.
Thanks, Judy. So this discharge theory it's really the core theory of change that we offer in all of our trainings through the Luna Jimenez Institute for Social Transformation. It is, I believe, as an activist who showed up at a public workshop that was being led by my mentor, a woman named Lillian Roybal Rose, who's now just a dear friend, also part of my life, colleague. It was really the first time when I attended her workshop 26 years ago this month that I heard the concept of personal healing put in the same sentence with social justice and social and activism work. And up until that point, I hadn't really heard those come together, and I didn't understand how they were linked. And it has been for me a recognition that I think this is the missing piece in many ways to the current level of effectiveness and capacity for bringing about sustainable, systemic, holistic social change. And so I do want to give you a very high-level overview of this theory. And if you would be willing to change that slide, Judy. This is a model that was that Lillian and I worked together on designing to describe the theory that comes out of the Reevaluation Counseling Foundation and the work of a man named Harvey Jackins and many, many other peoples. But I want to name them and give credit for them. Up until this point, I would say Lillian and also the National Coalition Building Institute, founded and continued to be led by a woman named Sherry Brown, were the people that were really calling out, and I haven't really seen anybody else do this work since or before, the idea that healing in this particular modality is necessary for systemic social change. And so the theory is very powerful in its simplicity and profound in its practice, and begins with the idea that every human is completely good. And it does require us to redefine the idea of what we mean by good. So many of us have had the message that good is in relationship to bad. In other words, as a dualistic or a dichotomized relationship. And that also that goodness is somehow premised on your deeds, that if you do good things, you are a good person, or the idea that you can be a, quote, good white person in the racial justice sphere is usually linked or akin to your level of wokeness or your capacity to have political correctness. And this model debunks, it really displaces all of that. It really posits that our goodness as human beings is a birthright. It's, you come into the world with it. It's not about what you do or don't do. It's not in any way reflective of your actions. The assumption is that everyone would act from this goodness, this what we call the golden light, or the inner circle of our human nature, except where we were hurt by oppression and not able to heal from it. So that's the default, and it's a beautiful shift when we can start with the assumption of the best of every human being, and that the explanation is not that people are bad or that they're evil or that they're ignorant or that they're defective, but the idea that they're injured and that this is a result of oppression that would have us not act from this place. And so this golden light, this inner circle, includes things like that we're brilliant, that we're all curious, that we're loving, that we're full of zest and full of pride, and that we're inherently leaders. And there's many things that would go in this circle, but it's a working assumption. And has it been studied empirically? Is there research on this? There isn't. But we work with it as if it is true to see if things don't shift, if the way in which we come at racial justice and equity work doesn't fundamentally have a different outcome, both for ourselves, for the work that we're doing, for the systems we're in, if we can apply this framework to the work as we go forward. Would you be willing to switch slides for me, Judy? Great. And so in the process of doing the process of constructivist listening, which I'm going to teach you in just a minute, there's 3 stages that you go through in the process of getting back your more flexible creative thinking, because the process of discharge is interrupted on us, unfortunately. And we get messages from very, very young that, big girls don't cry, big boys don't cry, don't be a crybaby, you want to sweat, I'll give you something, never let them see you sweat. You want to laugh, I'll give you something, you're crying, I'll give you something to cry about. These messages, wipe that smirk off your face or I'll wipe it off for you. These messages get in and confuse us and eventually start to shut down the entire process of discharge for us. And if any of us have held on to these expressions of very vulnerable human emotion, it has been in spite of the messages that oppressive society has delivered at us from the moment we were born, not because of it. So congratulations if you've been able to continue to connect to and feel your feelings. I don't believe that you can oppress human beings and not have emotions. And yet we continue to operate in the vast majority, not only in academia, but in the field of our work, we continue to operate from the framework that this is an intellectual exercise, and that the more that we can teach each other and give information and, describe experiences and hear the effects and point out statistics, that somehow that is going to be the thing that will fundamentally shift how we behave and act and experience our roles, both as the target and the non-targets of these oppressions. And yet, it's not intellectually that we're stuck. The information can be useful, but only if we don't have the pain of the hurt blocking us from hearing it. And so few approaches, in fact, none that I've been connected with, except really through the National Coalition Building Institute, led and founded by a woman named Sherry Brown, and by my own mentor, Lillian Roybal Rose, have I seen anyone attempt to describe and to talk about a very real process of doing healing that centers actually healing as a way through transformative change and to create a socially just society. So the 3 stages of healing that we've outlined is that closeness is required. You can't dial in. It's not a virtual experience. It is about being vulnerable. It is about being close. It is about risking. The important thing that I want to keep emphasizing is that we get to continue to decide how much we're able to risk and to show and be vulnerable with. Often that vulnerability wasn't met respectfully, and it was often used against us as little ones. And so there's a good reason why we have our guard up, and while we are often protected and often are scared to show the places where we've been hurt to someone else for fear that there will be, retaliation or retribution or gossip or just having it used in some way that doesn't honor the places that we were hurt. So closeness is required, and you're in charge of trying to figure out what that closeness can look like for you in a way that's authentic and true. And in our approach, we really do it as in a community way, that we really support people to take the steps that work for them individually, knowing that you're being held in a community of practice as you do this work. The second component is being listened to and listening deeply to others. And this is a really powerful part of the process, which I will describe in just a minute, which is the constructivist listening piece. And then third, and connected to it, is in the what I think of as the sacredness of the exchange of the listening and constructivist listening, one will spontaneously discharge. In other words, those beautiful inherent mechanisms that are identified in that blue outer circle of the nature of human beings will just show themselves. And people are often surprised at how quickly and how deeply and how easily, although it doesn't feel easy, but just spontaneously, the discharge happens when they're given the opportunity to be authentically close and to be heard by another human being. When I first started doing this work, which is hard to believe, it was 26 years ago this month, I went to Lillian's workshop, and it was, from my place as an activist, I was deeply committed to changing all the systems around me, and focused outward and externally. And as soon as you all get it, my life is going to go better, and you all need to change. And very much in the echo of what Judy talked about, we were waiting for somebody else. And my energy was, I'm the one, but I'm just the one to make you change. And that was where all of my effort went. And it was when Lillian said in that workshop, no system you're a part of is any healthier than you are. No movement you are leading or are a part of will be any healthier than you are. That I started to reconsider that the idea, which up until that point had felt like frivolous, extraneous, almost self-indulgent self-work, and I'm putting that in quotes, this idea that you would explore your personal experiences or learn where you got hurt as if that would make a difference institutionally, began to shift and change for me. And I really came to understand, really in my many years mentoring with and working alongside Lillian, that systems are made up of people. They're not this, nebulous, amorphous, unnamed thing. We are the systems. We are in them. And we continue to want to change the systems without recognizing that that change requires changing us, that we are the ones that can shift that system. And it will take both us being willing to do the work with and for and on ourselves, and to do it in a way that is in community and connection with others. People will not be so interested in you preaching about what this change has looked like for you. And I really want to emphasize, Judy's brilliant leadership in volunteering people in rather than, punishing, which, people are often like, you're mandated to go to a training, or it's compulsory, everyone must do this. And this idea that you have to do it this particular way, I think creates this idea that if this approach doesn't really relate for people in this moment, that they're now, quote, in the bad group, or the group that didn't pass social justice 101 class, or is now on the outs. And that fear base can really dissolve all of the best efforts in an institution or a system that's attempting to change. But if you can start with yourself and really commit to this practice, people will start to be noticing things that are shifting and that are different on you. They'll start to want to learn more, and they'll be attracted to the ways in which they're seeing you think in groups, or show up differently, or come from this place of compassion in this work, have more slack, take more initiative, feel less complainy, less needing to victimize or blame others. All of that will start to show up when people are committed to this process. And so I think we misunderstand the idea of what system change looks like when we fail to see that starting with ourselves is starting to change the system. So as Judy said so beautifully, I am the one I've been waiting for, and we are all the one we've been waiting for. And what would it mean for you to take that seriously? To what, regardless of the position or title that you're operating in, or the budget you have or don't have, or the office you do or don't have, make the decision that you don't want to continue to be inside a system of oppression, that it's limiting your life, and that you're not doing it for anyone else. That it's enough that you want it to be different for you because there's been an impact and a cost on your life. Christina, did you want to take us from here?
Perfect. Well, I think the oxygen mask, many people have heard this in regards to a parent and child. That's what it's always done. And I think the oxygen mask is for every single person on this planet. If we all looked at our daily existence, how we interact in the world, if we put our oxygen mask on first, in higher ed, we answer emails at midnight, at 2 a.m. We justify saying yes to every committee. We justify our exhausting of ourselves. And to the point where we deplete ourselves so much that we are no longer good to anybody. And most of all, we're no longer good to ourselves. We can get easily sick. We can get easily resentful. We can get easily impatient. We can get easily distracted. And we aren't putting necessarily our best selves. And so one of the things we wanted to encourage ourselves, I'll start with myself as I'm horrible at this, and you all on the webinar listening to this, is this work is asking for you to take your oxygen mask and keep it on every day, every minute. You are a precious human in the world. And when you breathe and you put your oxygen mask on, you take that time to breathe, you take that time for your self-care, you take that time, wow, your light, your shine is so much greater and so much more powerful. And one of the things I also realize is that when my oxygen mask is on and I authentically put it on myself, because it's so much easier to put on someone else because it goes to my own behavior patterns, like I want to take care of everybody. I learned with Nancy and these trainings is like, I need to take care of myself first. Like maybe people don't want to be taken care of and I'm taking care of them and they're like, hold on, I do not need another mother. And I realized I was not taking care of myself. And by putting the oxygen mask on myself, on checking myself, on checking the patterns I had as a child of always doing everything right and 100%, and putting my plate, having that, doing it all was so self-gratifying, at the same time so dehumanizing and demoralizing. I was losing myself tremendously. And the oxygen mask is just the symbol of like, when we learn to breathe, when we learn to say, I am important, with the same amount you would tell another student in front of you who's saying they're food insecure, or a student who is deciding to drop out, you would give them your all. You know you would. We should do that for ourselves. So then we could role model to that student in front of us, or the faculty member, whoever we have, that they too should put an oxygen mask on themselves, because they too are important in this world. They have gifts to share, and they need to do that in healthy, resilient ways, and an oxygen mask is very helpful for doing that. Next.
So I'm going to take just a few minutes to give you a high-level overview of our constructivist listening practice. And I love how Christina talks about the oxygen mask. I like to think of constructivist listening also in the metaphor of our forest management policy, which we've learned in very recent periods really isn't very good. I think of, our past forest management policy has been no fires, nowhere. You see a fire, you put it out. This idea that having controlled burns actually prevents these super wildfires from taking over. And the more we have these experiences, and remember, you're alive every day, so you have your earliest experiences having been targeted with oppression or not being targeted with oppression, but living in an oppressive society where there's racism, classism, sexism, heterosexism, ableism, ageism, anti-Jewish oppression, and other anti-Semitism. And you are in this on a day-to-day basis. And so every day you're getting up and these oppressions are happening around you, and yet you're being told, act like everything's fine, be professional, don't have emotions about it. And so we shove down the feelings to the point where we confuse functioning numbly as professional. And that is not functioning. That is surviving, and it is absolutely numbing. It numbs our spirit. It numbs the core of our passion, and our society profits from the numbing that happens. And the numbing can look like many things, but it's all the things that you do, that I do, that we do, not to feel. And it can be things like sugar, it can be things like caffeine, and it can be things like other kinds of drugs, certainly alcohol, pot, and it can also be work, and it can also be isolation, it can be screen time like Facebook or Netflix. It's all of these things that keep us from staying connected, because it just feels like if we really let those feelings up, we might never let them go, that they would consume us. And so constructivist listening for me is this commitment that I've made in the last 26 years of my life, that I will regularly listen and be listened to someone else, that I will have designated places to discharge intentionally, to feel all of the feelings that are coming up. And that controlled burn experience allows me, outside of those times, to instead come from my value system, to come from love and connection, from my brilliance, from my heart center, and to know that I am not acting towards somebody in the present moment based on an experience I had in the past that is not healed anymore, because I can heal that. That experience is in the past. And I'm going to just quickly do an overview of constructivist listening, and then I'll share a quick story if I have some time. So, overview. Speaker owns the time. This is perhaps a little bit different than how other listening is taught, and I'm sure you have many modes of listening that you've been taught. This one is not about communicating to the listener. The listener is witness and gives undivided attention during the speaker's time, and this constructivist listening is framed around two minds listening to one person. So the speaker can talk or not talk. They can use the attention of the listener however they want. And the listener agrees to give that full attention during that time by not speaking, by not interjecting, by not interrupting, by not asking questions, not during the time, and this is the next part, not after the time. So the key part, which we have found over and over again, that really is the beauty of this process and this practice, is maintaining confidentiality. And often we think the confidentiality is like, oh, I won't tell anybody else what you said after, which is an important piece of confidentiality, and one that I think, at least in my experience in higher ed, is probably one that could be practiced more. Information feels like power, and so it's really easy to go into a slippery slope of sharing things that aren't ours to share with others. But absolutely, when we're doing constructivist listening, the agreement is not only do we not share it with others, we never bring it up again. So for example, if I were to go second in an exchange, I don't refer back to anything the first person said during their turn. It's like it never happened. I forget it. When we're doing this practice, we call it sitting knee to knee. You're not literally needing to touch your knees exactly. What the idea is that you have nothing in your hands, no food, no drink, no toys, no phones, nothing to distract you, that you are heart open, that you don't have a table between you, that there is an agreement that you are wanting a space for creating an authentic, intimate sharing and vulnerable sharing. And finally, that we would do this in our heart language. And this is the language you curse in, count and dream and pray in. It's important reminding us that this work is for the speaker, and it doesn't matter if the listener understands a word. In fact, you're helping them keep confidentiality if they don't speak your heart language. This work is really for the for the speaker to process their experiences and to heal and discharge their hurts and experiences, and that will happen in their heart language. Would you mind changing the slide, Judy?
Christina's going to share. Nancy?
Great.
As a dyad participant, I've been doing it since 2017 when I attended Nancy's Institute with Nancy at Kathleen, and I've maintained that relationship. It's been a wonderful time since 2017. What I would say is it's exactly what it said on the slide. You listen to learn, you speak to heal. And what I have found in doing constructivist listening, I am a better listener. I have also understood that I have what self-constructivist listening is all about. I have my own tools to move forward. My dyad partner is phenomenal. She is a strong woman who is just amazing, but she never judges me. She never interrupts me. And I just feel her love for that 20 minutes that we can do a dyad now. I just know, and sometimes we call it our Jedi jar, like there will be instances that happen in my life, and I know when we have our dyad time, I can be there and I can cry, I can vent, I can do all those discharges with no judgment, and I feel phenomenal. I think Nancy always gives the example of, like, you know, when a child does a tantrum, they go in a full-on tantrum and then they're totally fine, like they look like life has just started anew. That's how you feel after a dyad. Like you can notice your patterns, you can come to a conclusion, and you're with someone who's just giving you 100% time and attention. And it's very rare that we have anybody who listens to us fully, 100%. Most of the time you want to catch someone in the middle of their sentence and reply back with a story of your own. And I find dyads have helped me in my work as a professional, in my home with my family. It has helped me, and I'm just very thankful for Nancy and Kathleen introducing the practice and all that's done. It's transformed your life. It transforms your life to be listened to and to listen to others with complete intention and just quietness. It's fantastic.
So we now want to, Christina, you're going to go?
It's you.
So we now want to take a little bit of time to hear from you and use the Q&A section of the webinar format to tell us a little bit about where could you start in offering an opportunity for constructivist listening. And if you feel like you can't, reflect a little bit on what's holding you back. So we really want you to do this as a personal reflection. And those of you who are willing to share, please put that in the Q&A, and one of us will read those out.
And if I could, while people are starting to share some of those, Judy, would you mind if I just one little caution, and the temptation is so strong, is people often want to start their listening partnership, their constructivist listening partnership, with their life partner, whether it's a spouse, whether you're married or not. And that's probably the one relationship I would say not to do this with. They're very invested in your life. They've actually probably built their life around having a partnership with you. And it can be really challenging for our core relationships to have that added on to our relationships. And so I like to think of that partnership having its own place, but not this. And I think it really is a push for us to get out of isolation and sort of the primacy isolation that can happen around primary partnerships, to look for other relationships to build these partnerships with. but I don't think we need to be stopped by having it be our boss. The other person, it doesn't make sense to be is your child. So again, because there's a hierarchy and a power dynamic with young people specifically, that would be one to avoid. But other than that, to really think as creatively as you can.
Great. Thanks, Nancy. Really important. I don't see anything coming in the Q&A or in the chat. So we'll just move on. So this is some time we wanted to ask you all if you had any clarifying questions or reflections about using this model in your life that you would have for us. And you know, I want to restate that we know that this format is really challenging. It's really challenging always for me. I'm so used to doing Zoom meetings and being able to talk with the folks that I'm with. And so this does become challenging to be so one-sided. But no, we are sending you a lot of open heart right now, and really want to hear your questions.
We did get a response, Judy. I don't know if you can read it or if you'd like me to read it.
You can read it, Nancy.
Okay, it says, in my own office complex of about 9 people, after sharing the webinar recording, then dialogue about what we might do with this, also maybe with a couple of people on campus who might be interested, possibly with about 7 others who are part of a small faith group outside of work. And then there were 2 others in trainings that I organize or facilitate. For example, Campus Compact will be having a training with network staff with Nancy. And then someone else wrote, we do this in our office's diversity trainings already, so this has been validating.
Fabulous. And so you all have already started talking about keep learning, one action you want to take, and one way you want to apply what you've learned today.
Mm-hmm.
Others have other things that they want
Yeah,
to
we got a question. It says, what are you calling this interaction? Do you want either of you want to answer that question?
the interaction. I don't see that question. I'm having
It's
a
okay.
hard.
It's okay. I'll go ahead and take it then. So I assume this came in from Jean Miller, that this interaction, we call it many things. So it can be called a listening partnership. It can be called a constructivist listening dyad or a dyad. So all of those would be the exchange of, and this is very different than doing just a paired listening where you get together and you share back and forth, which is a very common tool to be used for getting information or brainstorming or just having people share their thoughts about something. So this is very structured, and the idea again is for emotional healing and discharge purposes. And so that's how we use this particular tool.
I see another question came in. Where is there a guide to read more? So Nancy has several resources on her website that you can go to, and it's lgist.com, pretty easy. And we'll also make sure, we'll ask Marisol if she can include those with the link to this presentation on the Compact website as well.
Yes. Great. And I think we were going to share about a couple of opportunities coming up. Is that right?
There was another question about if you use structured prompts.
Say that.
Do you use structured prompts?
Yes. So I can say a couple of things about that, but I don't know if either of you want to answer this.
Christina, why don't you take this one?
We've done dyads with both. I think in Nancy's they were structured, which I think are very helpful to keep the conversation focused. And then we've had dyads that were free flowing, but they have been very, very pointed prompts that Nancy has available. And then we've had other dyads where we just talked what was just whatever came out. So I think they're both very effective, and they're both very phenomenal, and they both can get you to the next step where you're moving forward.
I would just add there that sometimes structured prompts help you stay focused, because I think when you do this work for a long time, you start developing a relationship with your constructivist listening partner, and you really have to check yourselves to really make sure that you stick to the tenets and the guidelines, because it's really critical that, again, we're recognizing the whole piece of we are who we'll be waiting for. And comes back to like speaking in your own language or in your heart language, because again, you have the answers within yourself. And that's what listening really provides. And I think sometimes, especially if you're prone, like myself, having been the second youngest of 9, I find myself always seeking guidance or advice when I want to make a decision about a tough decision. And constructivist listening really, again, recognizing that pattern where it's built into oppression, how that impacts my leadership. The prompts sometimes really allow you to come back to, yes, that's right, I'm not asking this person for their opinion. I have the answers within me, and I have to discharge and really recognize where this is coming from.
There was another question of, have you done any assessment?
Nancy and I, for all of the pieces that we have done, there's always an assessment and a survey that participants complete and we review. I don't know if Nancy wants to talk a little bit more about anything. To my knowledge, there's been no research in that way, but we do assessments of all of the programs that we offer, and that's always used for improvement. I've been really fortunate in my work with Nancy and Kathleen and the LGIS team to really pay attention to the feedback we're getting, to make suggested changes that will work. And that's been helpful to us as we continue to hit a roadblock and a challenge there around what participants would like to see further. So for example, like the just listening work that we do as a group has really evolved from the work that we've been doing with Nancy to continue that. And that commitment as a team has been really great.
And I just saw, I've seen some other Q&As coming in, and I won't take up a lot of time. Thank you for these comments. I think they're really exciting. I'm thrilled to hear how people have touched this different parts of this work. I do want to acknowledge, I think in the academic environment, we just came off of doing a training at a university in Seattle, and they were like, everything values intellectual academic approaches here. You know, you're really battling something that's pretty heavy duty, which is poo-pooing anything that looks like emotional work in an academic environment. And I do want to acknowledge that it's a very real barrier, that this won't be seen as academic enough or intellectual enough. And I know that there is a lot of research that actually is being done with people on this tool. I have an amazing colleague. She's a pediatrician, and is working right now to actually, if people know the work of Patty Wiffler at all, she started an organization called Hand in Hand Parenting Through Connection. And actually Harvard is in the middle of right now of using her work, which is based all on this theory, to promote and potentially introduce an entirely new way to work with young people in early childhood. And the pediatrician that is also working on this project is publishing a book called Why Good Babies Cry. So there's a lot of new research that is being done in this. I think the challenge in academia is how do we find ways to engage our full, whole human selves, and to challenge the idea that academia needs to be only in an intellectual capacity, because I think we do a disservice to ourselves in the system, and I think we do a disservice to our students and to the idea of what it means to truly learn as human beings when we disconnect our emotions.
Well, thank you all for this wonderful webinar. You know, I've done this work myself, and it's part of what we're introducing within Campus Compact around our sort of love model, living out our value of equity, how healing is centered in that. And so once again, thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you, attendees, for being on. In your inbox shortly, you will be receiving a survey for this webinar, as well as the slides from this. And then the webinar will also be available on our Compact website. So be on the lookout for that. Until next time, thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much.